Okay, thank you members, and you're very welcome to this morning's meeting. This is the 41st meeting of the Committee for Communities, and we do have quorum, and I now call the meeting to order. Can I remind anyone there in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no photographs or recordings are to be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of the cameras and sensitivity of microphones throughout the meeting. And finally, members, I would remind you of your responsibility to declare any interest in any item of the items under discussion today. So do members have any items or interest they wish to declare? Sean?
I was, it's just in the arts conversation later on that I was employed in the arts for 9 years.
Thank you, Sean. Brian?
I'm a member of the Committee for the Executive Office, just some correspondence there. Yeah.
Yep. And I'll declare a membership of Brondry Coldus in relation to the arts report that we're looking at later as well. Okay, thanks for that, members. Much appreciated. Apologies then. Clerk, can I check if there are any apologies today?
We have no apologies thus far, Chair, and we have nobody for Zoom either that we're aware of. It looks like everybody's.
Yeah. Members, any apologies? No. Thank you. Chair's business then, members. So just to flag up that we do have a closed session at the end of today's meeting to discuss a draft report and recommendations for the Minister following on from the arts sector consultation survey and engagement event which we did in the Long Gallery. And I would encourage everyone to stay on for this session. Probably, I'd say about 20 minutes we'll do that. So that'll be at the end. So members agreed that we go into close for that. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Agenda item 3 then is the draft minutes, and can I refer you please to page 6 of your meeting pack, and I ask members if you are content to agree the minutes of the 27th of March as drafted.
Agreed.
Yep, agreed. Thank you, members. Matters arising then, members, agenda item 4. You've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 17. I'll go through these items by number and group and ask if you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item. So first of all, can I ask if members if you have any comments on items from 4.2 to 4.5 inclusive? Kelly?
Just to start off, 4.2, could I put on the record a commendation for Lisburn and Castlereagh Council for their approach to homelessness? It's quite refreshing compared to some of the other responses that we have received. The other one then is 4.4. I'm a bit concerned, SSE, the closure of the energy services. They mention their contribution that SSE under this energy services division made to Bryson, who many of us know have an energy support scheme that they run. Can we just double check with Bryson if this will have an impact on their £100 allocation to support people with electric costs? I know that my office has worked quite hard over the last number of months to circulate that support, and it's very appreciated. But I just wonder, is this going to have a difficulty in the next winter that's coming?
Yep. Member content, we seek that information. Yep, thank you. Was there another item, Kelly, or in that section?
Where have you gone up to? Is it 4.5?
4.5, yeah.
Yeah, the only other one is 4.5, the Housing Executive Disabled Facilities Grant. They talk about a review report, and there's a suggestion that new terms and conditions will be considered. Oh. Will we be able to feed into those considerations, given the fact that so many of us know the issues surrounding the Disabled Facilities Grant?
So would that be aimed at the department, Kelly?
Yeah. To be honest, it might even have to go to the Housing Executive because it's an operational matter about their Disabled Facilities Grant. It's just to see, they've talked about that they will discuss with customers who have been in receipt of the Disabled Facilities Grant, but I'm just interested to know if the Housing Executive want us.
Yeah. Members content? We seek that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anything else, members? 4.2 to 4.5, or Andy?
Or just off the back of Kelly's point, would it maybe be prudent for us to ask Bryson to come in and brief the committee? Obviously, they've now run this emergency fuel payment scheme for a number of years, and I'm sure they've garnered valuable data as to the trends and difficulties that people are facing, and it might help to inform the wider debate around the anti-poverty strategy.
Yep, members content.
Idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. But I will, I suppose, just also flag in general terms. We are going to be significantly pressed in the other side of Easter around legislation and things coming through. So, but it is a very worthwhile scheme, and there should be valuable information there. So, members content. Yeah, thank you. Okay, members. Moving on then to a table papers. There's in page 3. There's a summary table of further items under matters arising, and in that table papers then we have items 4.7 to 4.11 are the first block. So I would like to draw members' attention to 4.7, which is the delegated powers memorandum for the sign language bill. Are members content that we send this to the examiner of statutory rules for her comments on the powers?
Yes, please.
Content. Thank you, members. Any other? Yes, Chair or Deputy Chair?
Thanks, Chair. Just yes, on item 4.8, and that's a reply from the Department about the support for voluntary and community sector in regards to the national insurance contributions. I just wonder, I know that the Minister had made an announcement last week at the all-party group of the community and voluntary sector, or their all-party group, about the £1,500 that would be given towards community and voluntary groups that fall under DFC specifically, just that funding stream. I wonder, could we ask for some more information on that, including like the total cost of it, which is going to be, when it will take effect, when the groups will actually receive the payment, and then again, back to what we talked about last week, what other funds are going to be made available, or supports will be made available for other community voluntary groups that fall outside of DFC, because the Minister still has a role to play in supporting those groups, even though the funds aren't directly through that department.
Yeah, members content. Brian?
Yep. On that same matter, I'm aware that like Neighbourhood Renewal and perhaps other groups have received letters of offer now for 3 months of funding. I've heard from some that they're concerned just with the employer national insurance contributions and the rise in the minimum wage, that for some of their posts, which are pre-existing posts, concern that employees will be falling below the minimum wage. So just if we can check with the department if they're ensuring that the salary element is covering that any existing employees are not falling below the national minimum wage.
Yeah, members content with that addition to that letter? Clerk, are you content with the detail?
Yeah, we'll check that through, Chair.
Yep. Thank you. Anything else in 4.7 to 4.11? Kelly?
Could I ask, in 4.10, there are internal post-project evaluation is completed on the Fresh Start programmes. I'm just wondering, can we have access to some of those? I'm a little concerned that what is perceived to be outcomes results, I'm confused as to how a programme can say what the outcome is, given an outcome is a long-term change in society. And that's my concern has been about this, is that there's still measurement of inputs and outputs as opposed to outcomes. So it would be useful if, as a committee, we could have a look at the reviews that are being done and what is being described as outcome results. Because in some of the schemes, and there's one in my area, the outcomes are not visible. So it would be very useful to, if we can, get access to those reports.
Yep, members can have seek access to those.
Would it be worth asking for EPOC and those involved in EPOC to come in and have, even give an update in terms of their work, given that they are, a few years into the full programme, just I suppose even just to see what impact they believe they're having on our communities.
Yep, members content. We look at scheduling that at some point. Yep, thank you. Okay, Melissa, Lannery.
411, Chair, just a reply re the Irish language strategy. I'm not that convinced that there's any real momentum there in relation to bringing forward the strategy for the Irish language, and that where the Minister implies that he is waiting for departments and that as part of the co-design process to come back with actions and cost of such actions. Now, that could be a really sort of slow process in many respects. So I would like to ask the Minister that what in fact is he doing in order to ensure this strategy is brought to the fore?
And maybe seek an updated timeline on those
exactly.
stages. Would members be content with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, thanks members. Okay members, moving on then to items 4.12 to 4.15. Are there any items there that members wish to draw attention to? Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. The review of liquor licensing system 4.12. This was something that this committee worked on quite hard in the last mandate, and I'm a little concerned. There's consultation happening at the moment, and our question is, or was, what's the intention with this? And in 4.13 we've seen a list of the legislative plans of the department coming forward, and it has nothing to do with the review of liquor licensing or any changes. It's not mentioned in that. I just wonder the purpose of this work, because we've seen it with some of the social strategies, you know, that groups have been invited and they give their input, and then that's set aside for other purposes, other things to go forward. I'm just wondering, is this busy work? It feels like busy work. It feels like the consultation is going to be done. There'll be potentially a report issued, but nothing is going to be done in this mandate. It's not on the legislative or regulations or anything like that. So I sort of wonder, in this time when the department is under such pressure for budgets, I know that there was in the legislation it asked for a review, but it seems like there's an awful lot of work going on for something that will end in no results. So it's to ask the question of the department for clarification again. These reviews, while it says it'll feed into, the two further reviews it says are expected to be launched in autumn 25. What is the purpose of these reviews, given the fact that the department, if they're doing nothing in this current mandate, it'll all be kicked into the next mandate and they'll probably do it all over again?
Yeah.
Are they expecting a duplication of the work?
What would the question be?
It's the purposes of this. Is it, while we appreciate that they're meeting the terms of a review requirement within the law, can they confirm that due to the legislative timetable that they have provided, that this work will not be dealt with?
And should we maybe seek information on how many officials are engaged? Because we have done this with the gambling, for example, of a similar, it's a similar trajectory in the sense that there's no legislation. So maybe as a starting point, if we can establish how many officials are actively working on this and what the purpose of that work is at present, is that the...
because it seems to me it's like a tick box exercise in a holding position until the next mandate.
Okay, members content with that?
I wasn't a member of this committee in the last mandate. Was there any opportunity to have an update on the work that you've done so far? And I'm like Kelly, I would like to see what the outcome is expected to be, especially in relation to clubs and off licences, etc., etc. The whole thing has to be looked at holistically rather than just the licence part. So I would like an update if possible, please.
So a written update along with that other information, yeah?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, were you looking in there? No?
No, Chair.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Members, anything else on 4.12 to 4.15 then? No? Thank you. Okay, members then otherwise content with the memos as drafted. Thank you. Okay, members, item 5 then is correspondence, and the correspondence memo is at page 36 of your pack, and there's a table correspondence memo at page 50 of your table papers. So again, members, I'll go through the items by number and group and ask if you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So starting off then with items 5.2 to 5.6. Are there items that members wish to highlight within those? 5.2 to 5.6. Kelly?
Could we ask, it's under 5.3, the potential for AI. I appreciate this is an invitation that we have received, but can we maybe ask the department what's their intentions or plans with use of AI, especially when it comes to the benefits system?
Yep, members content with that, yeah.
Because I know that there was some suggestion, I don't necessarily think it was from the department, but there was some suggestion that assessments may be put through an AI lens, and it might be worthwhile just for us to understand as a committee how much the department are looking into using AI.
Yep. A hot topic at the minute.
The concern for AI, it's an evolving technology, and even at the minute, there's an awful lot of reliance on it. I'm a wee bit sceptical that we're moving too fast on relying on AI for anything until it's a proven system. So I would have concerns.
Yeah, at the impact on the human interaction
Yep,
and support and all of that. Yeah, I think that is an important element of what's being done to safeguard that day, because it's a particularly complex, and you'd wonder at what the impact might be.
I just feel, Chair, that there's nothing to beat eyeball-to-eyeball discussions and not rely on electronic to decide what you think you're trying to say.
Yeah, I think being used as a tool to assist analysis or things like that, there certainly is potential which we shouldn't rule out. But I think you're right, Maurice, that there is a human element which is very important to retain and ensure that that's still a compassionate and an effective system in that sense. Go ahead, Kelly.
Just moving to 5.5, the roles and responsibilities of councillors report. I have no difficulty with the decision that the Minister has taken, but I think as a committee it would be useful for us to understand how the Minister came up with their decision, or his decision, on the difference in the councillors' wages compared to what the report had recommended. It's just so that we're aware of the calculation that was used. I don't have it's not a huge amount of a difference between it, but there is a difference. It just would be useful to understand that, I think. And the final one's at 5.6, where we have been asked from ERA about community asset transfer. Well, we don't have anything about it, but it'd be good if we had officials in front of us sometime to maybe talk about that.
Yeah, we had. It's an area of interest. All right, so maybe schedule for a future briefing on that issue. It is an interesting area.
Yeah, can I ask whether this has rectified the issue of different council groups having different wage bands? It doesn't actually say. It does say it references the fact that it's ended up that some councils pay is different, but it doesn't actually say whether it's setting a baseline for all councils. And I think that would be really good for us to understand, just to get a bit of clarity on that if possible.
Yeah, and I think in general in this area, I think it's my interest in this is around accessibility and ensuring inclusiveness right at the decision making process. And I'm very conscious of the discussion around the disability cuts, but in that context, how are councillors going to ensure that people with disabilities can become councillors and effective councillors? And I think it's an interesting, and including women and carers. There are so many groups that need supported to engage properly in that system. I think it's one we have to be quite careful with.
Also, Chair, there's another query I have, that the money on offer and the workload of the councillor compared to whenever I was a councillor is maybe 200% more. Are we moving towards a situation where perhaps councillors are full time as opposed to having a job and only part time?
Yeah, I think it's one that needs to be kept under.
Keep an eye on that one.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll take those. Clerk, you okay with the detail on them? Members are content. Okay. Okay, members, and table papers then we have at page 50 for their items. So the first block there I'll take is 5.8 to 5.11. Members of any issues they wish to raise in that section? No, members content. Thank you. Can I ask if members have any comments on items 5.12 to 5.14? Members content. Okay, thanks members. Thank you. Moving on then, members, to agenda item 6, which is an SR. It's SR 2025/64, Social Security Benefits Operating Order NI 2025, and it's at page 173 of your packs. So, members, we did consider the SL1 for this rule at our meeting on the 23rd of January 25, when we were content for the department to make the rule. Have members any objection to the rule? No. Therefore, can I put the question formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/64, the Social Benefits Operating Order NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
God bless you, Kelly. Agenda item 7 is SR 2025/66, the Mesothelioma Lump Sum Payments, Conditions and Amounts Amendment Regulations NI table papers they're in their table papers at page 151. So we did, members, consider the SL1 for this rule at our meeting on 23rd of January 2025 when we were content for the department to make the rule. So can I check if members have any objection to the rule? No, thank you, members. Then can I ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/66, the mesothelioma lump sum payments, conditions and amounts, amendment regulations, NA, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 8 then is SR 2025/67, the Social Security Benefits Operating Regulations NI 2025, and those are at page 239. We considered, members, this SL1 at our meeting on 23rd of January 2025 also, when we were content for the department to make the rule. So do members have any objection to the rule? No, thank you. Can I therefore ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/67, the Social Security Benefits Operating Regulations NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule. Subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rule, are members agreed? Thank you. And agenda item 9, members, is SR 2025/68, the Registered Rents Increase Order NI 2025, contained at page 251. We considered the SL1 for this rule at our meeting on the 13th of March 2025 when we were content for the department to make the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule? No. Therefore, can I ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025, the Registered Rents Increase Order NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah, members agreed.
Witnesses haven't arrived yet. You might want to take a short comfort break.
Okay, so we'll take a short break there, members, just to line up the table for the next evidence session. Thank you. Can I ask us to
Take out of session, please, Kayla. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Is this the bit where he's being interrogated?
Yeah. Well, no, this is
Members, that's back in
psychologist
session.
involved.
Okay. Thank you, Clerk. Members, we're moving on then to agenda item 10, which is a briefing from Trussell. So there's a copy of the briefing paper contained at page 257, and I'd now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Fiona Cole, and Fiona is Policy and Public Affairs Manager for Trussell here in the North. We have Chris Leach, and Chris is representing or works with Craigavon Area Food Bank, and Denise McReynolds, who is an advocate. So Fiona, I think it's yourself maybe going to make opening remarks. I'll go ahead and invite you to do so, and then we'll get to members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the members for the invitation. My name is Fiona Cole, and with my colleagues Chris and Denise, we aim to give you an overview of Trussell, an understanding of how our food banks work, and most importantly, we have time to discuss the reality of experiencing hunger and hardship. I know most of you have either met with Trussell, or more importantly, have a relationship with your local food bank. But there is still more to do. Between April and September last year, just over 35,000 emergency food parcels were provided to those in need. This is a 93% increase compared to 5 years ago. Within the last financial year, nearly 3/4 of parcels were with families and children. Over a third of those parcels went to families with 3 or more children. Among these, those referred to food banks in Trussell, nearly 1 in 4 are from working households. This is higher than the proportion across the rest of the UK. 61% of households referred to food banks in Northern Ireland live with disabilities, and we can only dread what will happen in 2026 if the changes to PIP do go through in Westminster. Hunger is not a food problem, it is an income problem. Ensuring people get timely advice and upstream support is a priority for Trussell. In 23-24 of those referred to food banks, 40% had received no advice from other services before their referral. A further 11% couldn't remember. A direct consequence of engaging in our financial inclusion service and referrals helped more than 600 individuals access advice and confirmed financial gains of over £550,000. What's even more positive is that 38% of those people claimed they would no longer need to use a food bank after accessing advice. Trussell's vision is to end the need for emergency food across Northern Ireland and the UK. In November, we launched our Northern Ireland Building Blocks paper, which set out policy priorities as a roadmap to achieving these visions. We would like to highlight 2 of our upcoming projects, Hunger in Northern Ireland and the Cost of Hunger and Hardship. First, Hunger in Northern Ireland is an in-depth analysis of who is more likely to turn to a food bank. They will ask the following 3 questions. Who needs to turn to food banks for support in Northern Ireland? What drives people to need to turn to a food bank for support? We also have a survey that includes a wide range of experiential questions, as well as questions about households' income sources and their savings. How many people in Northern Ireland use different forms of food aid as well? We ask about the use of food banks, social supermarkets and soup kitchens. Our next report is due to be published this September, which will ask the question, what has changed in the composition and drivers of food bank usage in Northern Ireland between 22 and 24? Secondly, the cost of hunger and hardship. From this work, we know that 200,000 people currently face hunger and hardship in Northern Ireland, and if nothing changes, this will increase by 43,000 in the next 3 years. Hunger and hardship explores the following themes: Who is most at risk of turning to a food bank? How is the risk in needing to turn to a food bank developed over time in the various demographics and households? And what policies can effectively reduce the number of people at risk of needing to turn to a food bank? The next stage of this project will be launched at the end of this month, where we can share our economic analysis on the cost of poverty to the NI public purse and how much it would cost to reduce poverty through mitigation such as introducing the 2-child limit. Chair, I've laid heavily into the policy and data analysis to illustrate as an organisation we are capable of capturing vulnerable people who for various reasons have been failed by a system, because no one in Northern Ireland should ever be in a circumstance where they cannot afford the essentials. Whilst we work in Westminster to ensure that universal credit guarantees every individual has enough to cover these essentials, I am working with some of your colleagues to achieve this in the UK. Stormont most certainly does have a role in ending the need for food banks. The anti-poverty strategy is a key document, and as we have presented today, we are an instrumental organisation in being able to sense check the reality of interventions, both in how people use emergency food parcels, but also in partnership with our food banks, their incredible volunteers and people with lived experience. So let us be a partner, let us be a critical friend, and let's ensure its implementation is a success. Food banks are a lifeline, not the solution. There is a clear way forward and we can all help. We know what's pushing people to food banks, so we know what needs to be changed so that everyone can afford the essentials. We're building consensus in communities across Northern Ireland for the changes that will end hunger for good. We need an updated social security system, secure and rewarding jobs, affordable homes and supportive services. And we ask today that you lead us in your part. With that, I would like to hand over to Chris Leach. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you. My name is Chris Leach. I'm the chairman of Craigavon Area Food Bank. I'm also a pastor in Emmanuel Church in Portadown. And I first started doing this kind of work in 2008. So off the back of the recession and credit crisis, in 2012 I formed Craigavon Area Food Bank. So 17 years later, I was not expecting to be still doing this kind of work. But we have had to respond to changes, particularly austerity and changes to the benefit system, how we respond to that, and in the various crises that our society has faced, from COVID, cost of living crisis, and even some of the Brexit mitigation work that had to be done as well. And so we feed about 5,000 people a year across the wider Craigavon area, Lurgan, Craigavon, Portadown. We partner with over 60 agencies. We also provide wraparound support to our clients. Most of what we did in the early years was benefit delays and changes, responding to that. And there's something fundamentally wrong when people are experiencing an oppression which is caused by their own government. And what we do about that is really, really important. But it's not the typical people that the media would have us believe that are struggling. A first-time food bank user, a family of 3, came and I was helping her to load food boxes into her car. And she started to cry as she described her situation. She said, 2 of my children have additional needs and I've had to stop working to care for them. And then my husband works night shift and she said, he cannot work any harder. He cannot do any more shifts and we still can't make ends meet. And increasingly that's the sort of people that we are seeing come into our food banks, people who are working hard and they cannot work any harder. That is a myth. The low wage economy in my area is significant. Also people on very sort of adjusted contracts where they find their hours changing on a weekly basis and they cannot manage that kind of stuff. But the other week I was at the Labour Market Partnership. I'm sure you know there are 11 of them around Northern Ireland, and what I heard was there's a massive skills shortage in Northern Ireland. It's a crisis which is pending. It's coming very, very soon. And my reflection on that was, well, I know where a lot of the people that you could potentially get to do those jobs are. They're coming to my food bank. We're seeing them in crisis and they're not ready for the labour market unless we make significant changes to support them, to support those who need a little bit of extra help because of disability, but also to support people who have found themselves consistently over time labelled as failures by our education system, that they are not fit for purpose and their self-worth is so low that they have significant barriers to overcome in order to be people who will contribute more to society. But if our welfare system doesn't support them in the first place, they will always just move from crisis to crisis. And we live in a form of meritocracy, but that meritocracy rewards certain people and penalises others. And that's the way things work when there are winners and losers. This system requires it at the minute. From the very, if you take a 5-year-old and you ask them what they want to be or what they want to do with their life, they will have aspiration. And yet so many people, because of the way our society is structured, find themselves with very little to look forward to in life. Their circumstances need to change. One of the ways that we can do that is to place people in community. So how we support our community infrastructure going forward is really, really important. We shouldn't just consider people as individual units of measurement. We place them in community, we support them in community. So supporting our community sector adequately is really important. We also run social supermarkets, and 80% of the people in our social supermarkets live in rented accommodation. So their very home circumstances are vulnerable, and that's a starting point for them moving from crisis to crisis. Additionally, we're seeing people with somebody who was a pensioner who came to our social supermarket. If you have a fixed income, it's very hard for you to react to the cost of living crisis, or to your landlord, as it happened to one of our clients, selling the house from under them and requiring then that person to find another accommodation, but also to find a 1 month's rent and a deposit. And so they came to our social supermarket. They were able to then use that as the basis for helping them to save money to deal with that issue. And we see that when you journey alongside people, when you build community around people, they start to thrive. We have a Christmas savings scheme as part of our social supermarket, and every year people start in September to save for Christmas. And one woman last year, she had £600 in her hand that she had saved herself, and she said, I have never in my life had this amount of money in my hand at one time. But that's what happens when we give people the opportunity to thrive, that very often they will take it. But what is my ask of this committee? I would like to consider the Trussell and Joseph Rowntree's Guarantee Our Essentials campaign, which asks a fundamental question: what is the minimum that people need to live in life? And why does our benefit system not actually meet that? And is that a moral issue that we need to address? So, for example, a single person on benefits will get £91 a week. So this is excluding housing, because that's a variable you can't consider. So they're getting £91 a week, but they should be getting at least £120 a week. So they're already in deficit. And most people on benefits are currently using some of those benefits that are designed for other things to top up the cost of their housing. And I would suggest that we look more carefully at that, and we start to ask different questions. So a lot of you were involved in calling for a fiscal floor for Northern Ireland, and what I would suggest is that we also need a social floor. We need to say, what is the line at which we believe people should not drop under? And the problem is that line doesn't currently exist, and because it doesn't currently exist, it gets pushed down and down and down. And one of the things that we can do is take a moral stand and say, no further. Here is the line, and we're not prepared to see people in our communities go below that, because we know that that will actually handicap them and stop them from achieving their potential. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to pass you to Denise.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to say to everyone, thank you so much for listening to me today. I'm only ever going to be here once, so please forgive me. I'm going to be really forward here and say, please just don't listen to me, really hear me. I'm going to tell you my story. I have worked from the age really of 13, part-time. Obviously, after leaving school, I have always worked 2 jobs until I had my first child at 30. I loved working. I don't work anymore, and I really miss working. Around 3 years ago, I had to go on long-term sick leave from my full-time job. I had battled on for over a year, being really unwell, to the point on my lunch hour I was getting into the back of my car and going to sleep for half an hour just so I could get through the afternoon. It was really tough. Eventually, after various tests, I got 2 diagnoses, nothing terminal, thankfully. One, I'm on a waiting list for surgery. The other one is a lifelong condition but can be managed. I applied for universal credit. That was fine, but managed to score 0 points on the limited capability for work, which astounded me because I had had MRI scans, consultants' letters, GP's letters, blood tests, solid diagnoses of my prognosis in the future, and I managed to score 0 points. So the money I was left at that time, after I paid my rent, I'm in private rental, I had £240 per month left for myself and my 12-year-old son. And I'm going to be forward again here and ask all of you, could any of you keep 2 people for £240 a month? The answer is no. It is impossible. I also have an older son who had just gone to university, and thank God he did, because literally then I didn't have to worry about feeding him. I just want to point out a couple of things. My son come home from school one day saying his rugby boots were too small, he needed another pair. £40. It put a chill along my... Where am I going to get £40 from for a pair of rugby boots? I don't want him to know I can't afford them. I'm trying to hide this from him. He's 11, 12 years of age. He doesn't need the adult worries. It's really not a nice feeling. And then I'd like to tell you about how I felt whenever I finally had the nerve to contact the food bank. I'm following my notes here. If you can imagine, all of you please, walk down your local high street, naked, and everybody will point, stare, judge, laugh. And that is how I felt asking for help. I felt rock bottom, worthless, a waste of space. How can I be in this situation and not look after myself and my child? So I did reach out, I got help, and I cried. And I cried at these kind people that helped me. Thank God for them, that they're there, but also we shouldn't need them. Not in this country, we shouldn't need them. So I had to go to my local MLA's office to appeal the decision on my limited capability for work. They helped, and eventually it was granted and backdated. It took 8 months. Ludicrous to me, because the proof was there. These are solid medical evidence to say you have this. 8 months. Don't understand it. Anyhow, it was sorted. So now I am on my correct benefits. I hate being on benefits. I would love to be working, but I can't at the moment. But it's still not an easy ride. I can meet my essentials. I have my essentials now. That is fine. But I don't know how I would face just a bit of a crisis in the house, It's still, there's no great pot of savings there. It's not an easy lifestyle. The thought of future cuts puts me in a headspin, and lots more like me. Because I don't think I could cope. What I would like to say, I'm one person, and you've heard all the numbers here, all the statistics. You have your spreadsheets, so forth. But there are thousands like me with genuine stories. Thousands. We're not just numbers or figures on a spreadsheet. We are real people with real children, real families. It took its toll. I mean, you're already trying to recover from health conditions. The stress of that is not helpful. But on the upside, that journey led me to where I am now, because I reached out to the Craigavon Food Bank. They started a lived experience group, which I'm now part of. I have met the nicest, the kindest people ever. We meet about once a month in a coffee shop in Portadown, and our wee group has a real mix of people. There's different religions, different languages, different colours. We all sit and we work together to see what else can we do to help people that are still in crisis. And then, to be honest, we'll have a good laugh and we get really noisy and a bit boisterous. But it's actually a really good therapy group because it's just peer support, and I'm glad it's there. I was also very touched to be invited to be a trustee for the Craigavon Area Food Bank last year. I think just as a person who has lived experience, I can maybe shed a bit of light from a different perspective on various things. So I'm grateful for that too. Finally, what I would like to say, I would like to ask you to please help us, people like us. We are people. Back us, support us, whatever way you can. Can you commit to pushing for legislation for a benefit system that supports people so their essential needs are met without the need for food banks? As I said, thank God they're there, but we shouldn't need them. Please, can we work together, all of us, to end food poverty? Scotland are doing it. Why can't we? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you all for what is very crucial information for this committee, I have to say, and it's something that we are hugely concerned about as a committee. I want to particularly thank you, Denise, for that very personal sharing, and it's really appreciated. And it does make the point very effectively that these are not numbers; these are real families in our communities, in our constituencies that are suffering. I also want to acknowledge and thank Russell for the work you do, and including in my own constituency, and it is really important work. But I agree with your own assessment that our task as politicians here must be to eradicate poverty and eradicate the need for food banks. They are not the way we should be supporting people in dignity and living full lives, and I think that is something you are filling a very much needed gap, and it's much appreciated. But our job must be to ensure that is the need for that is removed. I also agree with Russell with your analysis around that it's not a food problem, it's an income problem. And I note not only the levels of income but also the precarious work, and I know there is some work going on around a good jobs bill that hopefully will address some of that, but it's a very clear and direct linkage in that sense. And I also just want to indicate as well my concern around the whole issue of debt, because I don't think people are coping. I think people are getting further into debt. There has been figures released last week which would underline that reality, and that in itself, and as mentioned here last week as well, that in itself will be and is a ticking time bomb in relation to all of the things we're discussing today. So in terms of questions, maybe then, given that wages have not kept pace with or benefits kept pace with inflation, and the least well off in society generally have less disposable income, but can I ask what your assessment is on the current income levels compared to how it would have been a number of years ago? What's your assessment on that?
Yeah, happy to do this, and then Chris, if you want to say anything, and Denise, we always say nothing about us without us. So in terms of universal credit, as Chris alluded to, ourselves and Joseph Rowntree Foundation have done analysis to say that the minimum that a single claimant should have is £120 per week after housing costs, and £240 for a couple. So obviously that is universal credit, is Westminster, but we do say that the executive, the Minister did say that he'd spoke with the Secretary of State, but we asked that the executive endorse this collectively and to reach out to Westminster to say, as Northern Ireland, as a country, in part of the United Kingdom, this is what we say. Scotland did it also. I think as well in our building blocks paper, one of our 24 recommendations was about the real living wage, because we have seen that inflation has increased but wages haven't, and there's a real disparity, and that's why, as Chris has said, his food bank is no different, that it's actually people in working households, particularly those that maybe have flexible working, so it would be on the lower wage scale, but because of what their needs or their household composition, that's the work that they can get or that they can actually avail of, and that there is desperate. So we can give you specific figures, but the real living wage campaign is something that Trussell has endorsed.
Yeah, and I think as well, there are many people who are earning lower wages who would like and have some aspiration to improve their job prospects and to get the skills that they need, but because they're having to work so many hours to meet just their basic cost of living, they can't do that, and then they maybe don't have the margin outside of working so many hours, of juggling things, of juggling shift work, maybe 2 adults in a home, and the only way that they can make home life work is to basically never see each other. So the idea of then thinking, okay, there are these better jobs out here and I need to get skills. So I think how people get skilled up for the jobs that we're looking at, that we think we cannot currently in Northern Ireland provide enough people for the highly skilled jobs that are there, I think it is a significant issue. I mean, the other significant issue is the 25,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are not in employment or education. And again, the mental health issues and the stuff that they've been going through, but also when they're growing up in poverty. So we're seeing that less than 50% of children who are on free school meals get 5 GCSEs, C and above, and yet targeted interventions systematically change that number to over 90%. So Aspire are a great charity in Northern Ireland that do educational support both in my area and now in Belfast, and that number is consistent, moving that figure up. But then you give those young people a better start and a better chance in life and a better opportunity to then get a job which can provide the kind of income that they need. But the other side of it too is that when the rental market in particular is out of control, that sort of single biggest outgoing every month just drives everything else, and that's why there's no margin for those on lower incomes.
Okay, thank you, and that is indicative of what is a cost of living crisis, and I think these particular proposed cuts by the British government, that's a particularly relevant context that people are already so there is so little between the income and the outgoings. It's a really significant factor. I'm also conscious of just something you said there reminded me of the fact that these proposed cuts are going to remove benefit from 18 to 22 year olds, just an arbitrary number, given what you have said around the 16 to 24 year olds not in employment, education, training. But in the paper that you've provided us with, you've highlighted around benefit rates are already below the level which is needed to allow a decent standard of living, but the British government, as we know and as we are hugely concerned about, are proposing to cut disability benefits. Just how damaging are those cuts going to be for people with disabilities in your experience?
Most appropriate to ask Denise the question first, and then we can back it up with the statistics.
It would impact me enormously, to be honest. I mean, yes, I meet all my essentials now for me, myself and my son, thankfully. But there are no extras. There are no luxuries. If something breaks down, I will be sitting scratching my head. As well as that, recently, I've actually lost my licence through one of my medical conditions. Well, hopefully only for a year. I'm not sure. I'm lucky in that we live quite close to my son's high school, so he goes on his bike. If I wasn't there and I was having to taxi him to school, I'd literally have to move home. I couldn't. I would literally have to move. And trying to get a house, I mean, we're talking about private rental. At the moment where I live in a nice privately rented house. 10 minutes walk up the road from me is a council estate, and those houses in there that are privately owned are being rented for £750 a month. And you know that is that's a big part of my outgoings as well, is private rent. But honestly, we do not live a luxurious lifestyle. You know, I know some people do think that people on benefits, you know, sit back and they lie around all day and love getting their money once a month. It's not the case, not for anyone I know anyway. Most definitely not.
You, Denise?
It's the debate that everybody contributed to said it all, and we back it. You're 3 times more likely to have to use emergency food provision if you have a disability, and you're 4 times more likely to suffer hunger and hardship across your life. What this has done is it's put people into free fall, because there is no criteria, there's no definite, they're saying with PIP you have to get sort of your 4 points in one category, but haven't actually said what it means. So it just means that people have gone to worst case scenario and have already started to say, how am I ever going to live? And people with mental health conditions, knowing that the media is saying that they will be targeted most, have already suffered considerably as a consequence. It is a duty of care that government look after and protect their vulnerable. It is human rights enshrined that people have dignity, to have a right to a private life, and that they are cared for when they need it. And this has been failed. We're already hearing about judicial reviews that are coming in. It's age discrimination. And, you know, Chair, you said it yourself, this is not about cuts, this is about balancing books, and people's lives will be cost with it. So we will fight. We already have a petition. We've had over 30,000 people. I'm sure some of your colleagues in Westminster have already received those letters. On not only are we going to June to say about the Essentials Guarantee, but we will be bringing that up with all our Westminster colleagues as well on the 18th of June. But yeah, I think it's a good, valid question. And when people are already surviving, not enjoying life, then how can we ask them to cut their lifeline? Chris, I don't know if you...
Yeah, just briefly, the other thing I would say is that maybe sometimes we need to look at a different starting point. So if our normal, ordinary benefits are not adequate for people in the first place, are we actually pushing them into ill health? And then they end up on disability benefits because our starting point is fundamentally flawed. The stress and anxiety that people face, the way that they have to live their life in poverty will lead to them becoming ill. And actually the starting point should be adequate benefits, and then we start to tackle disability, not to try and penalise people for having a disability, but actually saying again, where's our standard? Where's our moral ethic around adequate benefits as a starting point?
Could I just interrupt 1 wee second again? It's just something I really should have said. My medical conditions are physical. Yes, I have day-to-day anxiety, but not a medical diagnosis of anxiety or depression. Thankfully, I don't have. But it's just thinking to what others are saying. Can you imagine people that actually have diagnosed depression, anxiety, something like that? I know how I feel over proposed cuts. I don't even want to say the words, but could people be pushed to drastic measures as such? People who are already suffering with that added anxiety, I just would hate to think that that's going to push certain people over the edge. It's not a pleasant thought.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go to members now and share your concern, Denise. Melissa,
Well, Padre Rovalig is all very welcome here today, and that, and particularly just about your frankness as well, too, in the way you have made your presentations and your own personal experience in that as well, too. Very moving.
Thanks.
In every respect. And yet, in saying that, it's not new to us as MLAs. In fact, in our offices, we hear this day and daily in many respects when we're dealing with people who come along to us for advice and making their claims and the likes of it, and we're only but too well aware of many of the difficulties and the problems that they're confronted with. And unfortunately, the sad thing about it as well too is that down the line now, because of the new strategy by the British government in terms of benefits and so on, the problems are going to be exacerbated in many respects. Now, and I know that there was an ask there that we would take on board, we'll say, our responsibility within that legislation and do as much as what we can do. And I'd have to be frank about this as well too. I'm not that sure just how much we can do, we'll say, as MLAs, and what I would expect that if anything, there'll be a greater demand on the services of the people who provide the likes of the food banks, and in particular then what you had alluded to there, the social supermarkets. And that's something I'd like to hear a wee bit more about as well too, because I know it just has been presented to me recently with the whole idea of the development of that. Now, I am an MLA in West Tyrone, so it's in the West Tyrone area, North Tyrone in particular, that they're considering the likes of a social supermarket as well. So maybe I could have a wee bit of a background and explanation about that.
Unfortunately, oversight by us, we extended the hand to Nicola, who went to the Strabane Food Bank and sort of pantry, and we would love to have you there as well. You're right, it's how much of it is reserved and how much is it devolved. So we do say, say to your colleagues who represent in Westminster, but also if we could get the executive as this assembly to say this is what the nation believes. But there is a lot that we can do in Stormont, and there is a lot of devolved within the anti-poverty strategy. So Scotland recently have legislated to end the need for food bank usage in Scotland, and they created a pathway. Unfortunately, after 3 years, it wasn't legislation policy. Apologies, it was a policy. But they looked at cash first approaches. They looked at community infrastructure, community resilience, and having that sort of roadmap out. So what we could do with the anti-poverty strategy is sort of look at that as an element. We also have, DERA have their food strategy as well, of how do we make things sustainable. So we have food bank usage. It is increasing, it is not decreasing, but actually aspirationally, what can we do from here to the future? At the moment, we say that people's cupboards are empty, so ours can't be, and that we will not reduce our use until that we have a sustained model. But there's certainly things in terms of housing, there's things that we can do in terms of mental health. We can look at sort of models of life cycles rather than looking at people in and out of poverty and sustaining them, that actually it starts from pre-birth right to end of life. And it's that advocacy, and yes, that will need resourced, and at the end of this month we will have some lovely smart people's figures on how economic interventions will say, if you spend this much, here's the short term, here's the medium, and here's the long term impact, but also the dignified right thing to do. So when yourselves finally get to see that anti-poverty strategy, and why we say we want to be a critical friend, is that not only do we have a very qualified team of research and analysts, we have people like Denise that can literally say, you're asking me to do this, I can't even get out of bed yet. And when we want to get people into work, we want to be able to give them the support, we want to give them that compassion and give them their dignity back so that they can bring themselves up to the confidence. And I assure you, we have seen it every time that person is confident to get back in the workplace. They are the best valued person. But we also need to see, like carers legislation, that if you are caring for a loved one, or if your son or daughter is in school and has autism and needs to come back, you're protected in legislation from Stormont to be able to go and withdraw yourself from the employment, make sure they're okay, and come back without, a sort of a failure or sort of some sort of negative attitude. We need to have support from the small and medium and large businesses to understand that flexible working, and I know Carers and I have presented to you. So there's a lot that we can do together, and without sounding like a broken record, once we get this strategy and once we see this and once we see where the framework is within the ministry, we can then sense check it. We can actually give you the roadmap you need. We know why people visit our food banks, and we know why food banks are no longer needed. We just need to get that interim measure. We're not asking for a golden goose with an egg. We're asking for realism, but also aspiration. We see you as leaders, and this committee has not fallen short from being aspirational for the people that you support in this country. It was a long-winded answer.
It was a good answer.
If
I could answer just briefly on the social supermarket aspect. So food banks enable us to respond at scale. Social supermarkets enable us to respond in a targeted way. So in my case, 5,000 people a year or a few hundred people a year. The sustainability of social supermarkets is very difficult. In my area, we're the only council area to have a centralised food hub, and then 5 social supermarkets that work off that in a kind of framework that we've set up in conjunction with our council. And that was a co-design process, which was very beneficial. It enables us to journey alongside people over a longer period of time, the social supermarket, and it also enables us to help place people within the context of community. Because when people are removed from isolation, poverty is very isolating, and people journey alongside them. We do that with the food bank too these days. We provide wraparound support, but we can do that on a slightly longer term scale with a social supermarket. It really does benefit people, because when somebody is in crisis, they do not have the ability, the capability to think beyond that crisis. They're in crisis mode, and helping people out of that crisis mode to a place where they can actually start to be part of their own solution, but in the context of community, that's the real benefit of a social supermarket. It does help them financially a little bit too, but what we find is that when people start coming over a period of time, and we do things like cookery courses and cooking on a budget, general financial budgeting courses, they enjoy that, but it's the community too. They're held in community, and then they journey in community, and that is why, again, we need to look at how we support in the wider community and voluntary sector to support people who are in poverty so that they don't have to journey alone.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to other members now, but I'll just do, while we got an early start, we're eating into the time rightly, so I'll just ask people to be as succinct as possible as well, please. So I have Kelly, Nicola, Sean, Morris and Brian all to come in, so go ahead, Kelly, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to concentrate around the housing issue, and others will deal with other parts. But Denise, thank you. That was a very succinct and clear way of explaining exactly what it's like. And I wish that you were the only person that I heard a similar story from. And thank you to Fiona and Chris, of course. So looking at the housing thing, I'm thinking, okay, so we've got the Labour government who we've had a motion about that we don't agree with the changes that they're making. But I'm trying to think of what we as a committee can do immediately to help. So Chris, you had talked about the pressure that people are under, and Denise, you very clearly made it out. People who are having to depend on the private rented sector, who don't feel secure in that tenancy. Some of the immediate things that we could actually do, well, the department could do quite quickly, would be to improve that security of tenure, to ensure that people, say, have protection from no-fault evictions. Do you think that's something that we should do now, so that people, in advance of any changes, can at least have security in that? And I know that the cost of private rental is difficult, but unfortunately we need those private landlords within the system in order to deliver the number of homes that we need. But I'm just asking you first of all about that security of tenure. Would you like to see that ban no-fault evictions coming forward as quickly as possible? And it's about that resilience for tenants who are faced with hikes in their private rental. Is that something that they're coming to you about? Are they going to make the call, or are they going to advise NI, or who are they reaching out for help with on that?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. I think the no-fault eviction is something, if it can be done quickly, will make a significant difference. Fundamentally, people are coming to us and they're living in houses which are damp. Things are broken, including heating systems. And when we talk to them about, you should go and talk to your landlord, they are terrified. Because any home at the minute, no matter how awful, is better than the alternative, which is to be thrown out into the open market and to have the indignity of people doing an analysis of your financial state and then judging you against 20 or 30 other people, cherry picking who they think is going to be the best. I think that has to change significantly, but there needs also to be minimum standards and some kind of measurement and control of that, so that people don't have to live effectively in squalor. I mean, we're getting back to what we used to read about the dampies in the 1960s in Glasgow, and the kind of conditions that people are living under. Conditions that people are living in rented accommodation currently it's making people ill. The physical conditions plus the stress and anxiety, and that thought that I could be thrown out at any time, and if I make any kind of complaint to my landlord, I'm going to be in trouble.
The other suggestion that we have, and it's something shared with both the Cliff Edge Coalition and also with House and Rights, is that if we had access to financial and a grant, so make sure that you're managing your advice, but also if there is a small discretion where you slightly get into rent arrears, this is slightly different to the discretionary support, that actually to sustain and maintain that tenancy is cheaper than the alternative, which is that person gets evicted and then they have to go into temporary accommodation. so many times this committee has condemned the fact that they're using lodging huts and glamping tents, caravans to put people in temporary accommodation, but it's also at a huge financial cost. So we would agree with the no-fault eviction that there is some sort of discretionary fund to keep people within their private tenancies, and also that the fuel poverty strategy looks at heat efficiency in these rental houses.
Thank you very much. Can I just say, Denise, the people who I find are the best budgeters in the world are the people who do use food banks. And to be honest, sometimes I find it quite frustrating that people are being told how to budget when actually I have never met people who can budget so well, because the money is so tight. But thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kelly. And we'll go now to our Deputy Chair, Nicola Brogan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fiona, Chris and Denise, for attending here this afternoon, and Denise, especially yourself, for sharing such a personal story. And it was very powerful and has definitely resonated with us, so we do appreciate that. And I must say that, you know, I've spoken to many people in my local community as well who share your concerns. You know, yourself and others have faced real hardships in the last number of years anyway, and then with the announcement that the British government gave of these welfare changes, people don't know where to turn. They really are really anxious about this. They don't know what's just round the corner for them. And I'm nervous for them too, and of course we will do our best to oppose them. We will oppose them, but it's unnerving for them, so I do share your concerns. And Fiona, as you said, I was able to attend the Strabane Food Bank and Social Supermarket, and it's absolutely incredible the work that happens there, and it's so important for the community. But I suppose it is back to that point where the community shouldn't need that there. The social security system here is obviously broken. It's not fit for purpose. If people on receiving benefits and receiving that support still have to go to food banks and get that help. And Chris, the example you gave about the family with 2 children with additional needs, and the father out working all the hours the God sends, and they still can't make ends meet. There's something badly wrong. So I do share all your concerns. I just want to ask if you want to maybe yourself about the anti-poverty strategy. I know that the committee has been pushing for the Minister to publish his draft strategy, and for us to get sight of it and for others to get sight of it. We're disappointed that the co-design group hasn't been engaging with them, because I think like yourselves and stakeholders right across the board have such valuable input to put into the strategy, so that is disappointing. But I wonder what your thoughts are at the moment. I think the Minister has brought it to the Executive. Do you think it'll be fit for purpose? I know there's some questions around that. And what do you want to see from the anti-poverty strategy?
So there's a realistic approach that we've heard that the department are using, that we're in confines, but poverty, there is a pragmatism to poverty as well, and it has to look at, if it's going to be fit for purpose, it has to be interdepartmental. There has to be a commitment beyond communities. But with respect to comments that have come out in the media about co-design, we work in a co-design way, where we input everything from the first part of looking at a project. We get input from people like Denise, we get input from our food banks. So then every stage we look at something and we commit it together. Now that doesn't mean to say at the end of the stage Trussell will take every recommendation from a co-design group. That's not the ethos of it. But what it means is it's the most informed, evidence-based from the stakeholders that will appreciate it. The co-design group that we're a part of has done a tremendous amount of work, and also has sense-checked the implications of what poverty does, and just the ripples it has. The problem with systems and structures is they don't look at the chaos of somebody's life, and as you spiral, how further that gets, and that your education is impacted by the fact that you're too cold to sleep or you're too hungry to eat. So that's why we say it's not just Department for Communities, it's a commitment cross-executive. I think we will not comment or critique until we've seen it, but we know societally what we want to do, and there's no we've sort of been in speaks with the Department for Communities what we would like to do as one of the pillars within the anti-poverty sector, and also we work so closely with the faith sector that we can bring together with Joseph Rowntree Foundation, with Bernardo's, with the Anti-Poverty Strategy Group, civil society, so that you're not just getting an answer from Trussell, you're getting an answer from everybody who will be involved, including the small businesses, including big businesses and the unions, so that we can say collectively this is what it is. We know that it has to be a life cycle approach. It can't just be 3 pillars of looking at how to keep people out of poverty, sustain them out of poverty. But until then, we're the same, and I know very much that it is the best kept secret, because normally at least one of you in this room would have had a sneaky look at it, even if it was on paper. But I know you're just as in the dark as we are. We would say there's nothing to fear here. We are the biggest champions of what the department does. Nobody works in the civil service to not help people. Nobody does your roles to not help the communities that you serve. We're the exact same. So sometimes it's life. We're not always going to agree. We don't agree in the sector all the time, but we can at least give you the robust evidence, and we can ask people like Denise and her peers how this could help or hinder. And let's be aspirational, because if we're not, who will be? Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. I think that's a nice way of explaining how well co-design can work and how important it is. Just one final question, Chair. I know we'd worked previously on the childcare strategy and the importance of that, and you've mentioned that in your paper. Do you want to maybe elaborate on just the importance of us making sure that childcare is affordable and accessible for everyone in society?
Yeah, more and more as the people that come to the food banks are working age. So we had an incredible intervention with the Education Minister of 15%. Personally, I'm privileged. I have 2 working household families, but our nursery ourselves have had to, with the National Insurance contribution, they've had to increase their fees by 10%. We know we're lucky. So if you have 2 people that are struggling to pay full-time nursery care on households that has 2 full-time incomes, when you then put that into somebody whose life isn't as privileged, who has to do sort of out-of-hours work where they can't get childcare, as Chris alluded to, that you have some person that literally they shift swap as parenting. We need to have something more than that. We need to have a robust ideology that childcare is an infrastructure. It's not just a luxury. And that the reality is that privileged people like me did benefit from those interventions, but there's so many people that can't even afford that to get to that point. And I would like to ask you, because you would see a lot more in your food banks, sort of that continuing question.
Yeah, I think that there's many people who would love to be working, and childcare takes priority. And as a parent, you know, it should. We should kind of want the best for our kids, but also I think that when our children are growing up in poverty and that they don't get a good start in life, we're then working, you know, behind, and we end up then when these kids become adults. I think, well, how have we got to the point where maybe a lot more of them seem to be going on to benefits? Well, we only have to look at the obstacles they've had to overcome throughout their entire lives, and the family unit. I mean, the family unit gets put under stress and pressure too. You know, that's where people really start to struggle. And so how we tackle that, and how we provide the opportunity for families to provide for themselves, because that's fundamentally what everybody wants to do, I think it is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Going now to Sian Littlehull. Sian, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've said more than enough this week in terms of my feelings about the impending cuts. Denise, I just want to say that your story is worth 10 policy papers. My brain doesn't exactly compute the reading and taking in a policy, but when I hear stories like yours, it makes me realise why we're sitting around this table and why we do what we do.
Thank you so much.
So it was incredibly brave. Fiona, I know that we've engaged a lot in the past, and Christine and Ashley in Ballycastle Food Bank are living, walking angels. But I'm just wondering, in each of the food banks, do you track the food parcel usage by disability, or any of the factors that we can maybe be looking at to assign some of the cuts, which will be more impacted?
No. There's obviously compliance and GDPR, and we can go into specifics, but I wouldn't say that at the moment our content management system would look more than lifelong conditions or disability. And it's a dignity as well, is because when you have to be referred on, you may not feel comfortable at that stage. So it is something that we have seriously considered, and it is something that in the next sort of 6 to 12 months we're reviewing our content management system, because Chris will know more than most, it is very clunky and it's very admin heavy. So with that, I'd say more, it'd probably be better for you to...
Yeah, I think we always have to be, I think that data is really important for evidence, and then we always balance that with the vulnerability of our clients and the fact as well that we are not medical professionals, so there's only a certain amount of questions that we can ask, and there's only a certain amount of questions that we should ask too, because we don't want to unnecessarily put any barriers in people's way, but where we can provide some of those stats to evidence, I think it's something that we should definitely look at.
Yeah, I'm just wondering in terms of if there is a cut to the likes of the health element of UC or DPIP, will that then, I suppose, will we be able to track whether more food bank usage will come from that? I suppose that's
So I suppose then people are going to say that they've lost benefits, and they've lost specifically certain benefits, and so we're more likely to be able to track that easier.
Yeah, a lot of what we do, sorry to interrupt, Jan, is we look at usage versus need. So that's where we do a lot of the modelling. So we're starting to look that if people lose, you could lose up to £1,300, but most people will lose about £300 to £400. Will that put them at risk of hunger and hardship? And where we do that is it's a social metric, and it's not just household costs, but it's your heating, utilities, your childcare and your transport that we look at. So it's slightly different to just looking at absolute and relative poverty. So we'll be able to give those figures in due course, and we will be able to give them in Northern Ireland. But as you said in your speech, we can't give that yet because we don't know.
And I think that's the most frustrating bit, is that there's so many unknowns around, particularly the Northern Ireland element. But I'm just really struck. I've always known that there are more and more working people using food banks, but I think if the whole purpose of these cuts is to get more people into work, it's a bit of a counterintuitive way of doing it. The other question I had, Fiona, was more about the essentials guarantee. Obviously, I think I absolutely agree. We have to have a baseline where people get their basic needs met by the state if they can't do it themselves. I'm just wondering, do you know anything about how that is calculated and whether that's adjusted on a yearly basis and things like that?
Yeah, so we have, again, very smart people have been able to just look at sort of basically the food bill and the level of need of what you need in your working week as a single person. So that's how they've been able to calculate it. And of course, Chair, I can send a more articulate way of saying that. What the Guarantee Essentials is asking for is two things: that is an independently verified, and that it goes with inflation as well. So it's not what the UK are proposing at the moment is saying, but we're going to increase it by, I think it's 3%. They've said it's an extra £3.75 per week per person is what they, in reality, it's not a cup of coffee that they're increasing. So they're saying, but £65 a week, we understand that people are not getting enough, but by the time that that's even implemented, it's inflation means that it's going to be a deficit in real terms, and people are going to be worse off.
Thank you.
Sean Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. Thank you very much, Denise, for your presentation.
Thank you.
It brings it home to me. I was sitting in the office yesterday, and a fellow I've known a lifetime through football came in to check with one of the girls about a non-life-threatening operation he needed, and when he started that journey of needing an operation, he was quite healthy, but still needing it. It's then gone from he's now disabled.
Yeah.
He was in yesterday, he was telling the girls, I'm going to have to stop working. The pain's too much.
Yep.
I'm going to become disabled if I keep on. So health, this is an interdepartmental issue, I think, and health is a big place to play in it. The other thing that I'm concerned about is young people, young boys and young girls growing up who will become adults, who will become mothers and fathers, who have no skill sets. And again, if you look at higher education, there needs to be some sort of outreach from more colleges and universities into communities to get hard to reach people, to learn them skills for employment. And employment gives you dignity. It gives you money in your pocket to buy things for your family, for yourself. And without that money and without that dignity, I think you're driving yourself down into depression. And that's a worrying trend if you take at the statistics in this country of people who commit suicide. And there's a multitude of reasons for it, but that should never be the way out. There should always be help available for people who are at their lowest ebb. Now, you say that there's 217,660 claimants on receipt of PIP. The government's changes to PIPs is going to change all that. We have it in our office, and we don't know. We can't give answers because we don't know how it's going to work out. And people are worried. And a lot of people who suffer from disabilities are more worried than others because the criteria set about is quite strict. Makes it very difficult for people with a disability to gain 4 points across the board. So it's a worrying time, and I think we as a committee will do everything we can to try and lessen the burden, and that includes taking a look at how this welfare reform is going to pan out, and if we can have any mitigation in place to combat that. But thanks very much for your presentation. I find it very interesting, especially yourself, Denise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morris and Brian.
It's probably, you've answered a lot of questions. Yeah. It's probably more common, but as Morris has done. First of all, thank you for the work that food banks do, and you've said you really want to see food banks coming to an end, that they're a lifeline but not the solution. But actually, it's clear from your work that you do try to help people find solutions, and you were saying there that 40% hadn't accessed advice, support, and you're helping then people where they can receive extra benefits that they're entitled to or otherwise support services. So I appreciate you're almost being a bit modest, I think, about the important work that you do, that you are helping people find solutions. The benefit system needs to prevent poverty, needs to provide for those who cannot work. Equally, it needs to always incentivise work. Those who can work, should be helped into work. But society, the government has a huge role to play in ensuring people can work and are better off in work, and that there still will be benefits that they're entitled to. The Pathways to Work Green Paper, clearly a lot of it was just about cutting costs and making savings for the public purse from people who receive PIP and other disability benefits. There is things in it though about which in paper are meant to be about employability support. We'll see how that works out, because we have organisations here who provide that support who've had their funding cut. But things like the right to try as well, in theory, there should be some benefit from that, but all of this, we need to see the detail of it. Ultimately, we need a system which protects people from the excesses, of market forces, and you've touched on housing and childcare and all the issues that just drive people down in their personal finances. So we're working across these range of issues. But last comment I'll make is that the practical examples are the best, and thank you again, Denise, for sharing your personal story, and that is appreciated. And I know the food banks, you don't interrogate people when they come to you, you rely on the referring agencies, and you're not always hearing the detail, but you will pick up people's story, and it's important that those stories are told, because that's what gives the practical example for us to understand where the system needs to be included. So whilst these things are at Westminster, most of us have MPs there who lobby on these matters, but we will still, it's important that we hear from your experience and hear what we can be doing at a practical level as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And I suppose just a brief one from me, and thank you all for your session. But one of the fears is here, and one of the awarenesses that this will likely have a disproportionate impact. The cuts that we're talking about, disproportionate impact here. Do Trussell have any sense on a figure around that disproportionality from the work you already do?
We can only go first on the census figures, and also that our usage figures are proportionately higher. I don't need to quote why. We all know that post-intergenerational trauma of post-conflict suffering is still rife, particularly in the people that we see. We also see that we unfortunately have a higher sort of, I hate the word economic inactivity, but what we can do more so is as this unveils and when they start saying about the criteria, is that we can start actually having those conversations with people because of the trust of they have to confide in the food banks of what will that actually mean, or why is this disproportionately. So we can give you the statistics and they will be in line with what you already have, Chair, but it's people like Denise and connecting with lived experience, and then we triangulate that data to give you an experiential but a sort of a real moment in time understanding.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important to say is that food banks are mostly staffed by volunteers. We have a certain capacity in our network in terms of what we can physically do. We have a certain amount of capacity in terms of the amount of food that gets donated to us. When the cost of living crisis hit, we faced a crisis, and that was that people stopped donating to us because they couldn't afford to anymore. And so any increase in people accessing food banks or similar services isn't necessarily going to be met, because that puts significant pressure on us and it puts significant pressure on the mental health and well-being of our volunteers too, because it's very difficult to consistently deal with people's problems when they are really struggling, and for you to feel that burden when you're not necessarily trained. Everybody who volunteers in the food bank does it because they want to make a difference, but they pay a price for that in their mental health and well-being too. So increasingly now we are having to look at where is our capacity limit, and also how do we protect the people who volunteer and work with us as well, because fundamentally we're asking people to do a job that they shouldn't be doing in the first place. But we need to think about the systemic solutions to those problems together.
Okay, well listen, thank you. Really appreciate the information, appreciate the very honest evidence and very important evidence, and the commitment to provide committee with some further information. That's really useful as well. And just to restate the fact that we believe that there is huge value in the engagement process and the co-design, engaging with the co-design group to glean that information in real time and in a reiterative way. So thank you for that. We'll take a look at anything further we might do now, but thank you for attending committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and all the best for the future. So remember, just checking if there's anything picking up wise, any further actions coming out of that we might want to consider. I know it's all very fluid at the minute and there's information coming in, and we can keep an eye on all of that. But members are content for now. I propose we take a short break there before we go to the next briefing session. So maybe a 5-minute break, and then we'll ask the clerk to take it. Thank you, clerk. Okay, members, that is us live session, and we're resuming our meeting at agenda item 11, which is a briefing from the co-ownership, briefing on the barriers and solution to building homes here in the north. So papers for this agenda item, members, start at page 262. And I'd like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Mark Graham, who's Chief Executive, and Charles O'Neill, who's Director of Product Development. So Mark, I think it's yourself going to maybe make opening remarks, and then we'll go to members' questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk about housing and co-ownership. So I think we had sent out a copy of the roundtable report we did. So the basis of that, we in October last year, I think it was, we got a number of people, actually some people from this committee, other politicians from different committees, together with people from government, from the Housing Executive, from Belfast City Council, and people from the private sector and the social sector to discuss, how do we solve our housing crisis? What are the things we need to do? And this report was a result of that. I guess a lot in it isn't greatly surprising. So the area, I think there's a recognition that there are wide systemic issues about why we don't have enough homes and why we don't have enough homes that are affordable. The main report recommendations coming out of it were around skills and capability. I think there's a recognition that even if we started building more homes today, we're actually going to struggle to get enough bricklayers and enough people in the construction sector to do that. And I think there's a role for government in terms of having a skills strategy around the construction sector to make sure we have the capacity. Inevitably, infrastructure is one of the major barriers that came up in respect of how we get more homes built. And I think there's a recognition, Northern Ireland Water is a critical piece of infrastructure that we need to address, but there's other wider issues about the electricity grid, and homes don't get built outside the context of a community. So having services, having public transport, and all those things need to come together for effective housing. There was a very, I think, useful discussion on planning. And I think the thing that came through to us is reform of the planning system is more than just making it faster or making it more predictable. I'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, but I think progressing the local development plans and that each council has new local development plans and has planning policies is going to be critical. So from our perspective, one of the very important things within local development plans is that they will mean that all residential developments have to deliver a certain percentage of affordable homes. And we've been working with the departments and others, private developers and housing associations, to make sure we can be part of that. So some development, for example, we're working with Apex on a scheme in Glenmona in West Belfast, where they are doing a number of homes that will be built specifically for ownership customers. And we're hopeful that as that rolls out across Northern Ireland, as the councils adopt those planning policies, that will give us access to new build homes. Because I think one of the things I'll come on to talk about later is one of the major barriers for us is actually our customers being able to find homes at the moment. So I thought that was a very useful conversation, and I think there was a belief that if we get local development plans right, and if we get those implemented, that it will give real opportunities to get more homes built and to get more affordable homes built. And we also had a discussion about what's the obstacles to do that, and a lot of it's to do with resourcing, the resourcing within the PAC. Inevitably, access to land came up. I noticed there was an interesting debate in the Assembly earlier this week about how we make better use of public sector land, without getting involved in the detail of the argument. I think we'd make 2 points, I think, which came out of this, which was, yes, we need a system that public sector land can be properly used to build more homes. But to be effective, that has to be done in the context of the ability to remediate sites, particularly, a lot of public sector land is brownfield sites. A private developer might say it's not viable because, there's various things buried in the ground that needs to be dealt with. So I think if we can use public sector land, do land assembly, pull that together with private land, and have some mechanism to make that site viable for the private sector to come and develop, I think that could be a game changer. And that is what the Land Agency does in the south, and it's what organisations like Homes England and councils would do in GB. And there were some really interesting examples that the Housing Executive were talking to Belfast City Council about how some of their sites could be used in Belfast to actually get homes built, and particularly do mixed-use developments as well as just pure housing. So I thought that was actually a very, for me, insightful conversation. In co-ownership, we largely deal with private developers, and I think to get the homes we need built, it will, in the end, the majority of them will be built by private developers, and it's the private developers we have in Northern Ireland. And the message they tend to give to us is they would love to build more homes, but they need to have confidence to invest money. They need to have confidence to go and buy sites, to spend a large sum of money getting planning permission. So I think one of the things that public sector can do is to create that pipeline of sites, to create that pipeline of work. And the private developers I speak to are most definitely up for coming and building more homes if it's viable, if they can make money. And I don't think any of them have any real issue with a certain percentage of those homes being affordable, and they're more than happy to work with us with the product that we do. So that was a summary of the round table. I'm happy to stop there. I was going to talk a bit about our new funding and our plans for the next 4 years, but maybe if I'm happy to stop there and take some questions on the roundtable report.
Yep, may come up in questions anyway. Mark, thank you. So, thank you for attending today. It's an important part of the housing fabric. And I know that we do have an ambitious now housing supply strategy, but that's going to be extremely challenging, and you have touched on some of those challenges there. Clearly, we don't have the necessary funding that allows us to build the volume of social homes we need at the present time. In relation to that aspect, how much of a game changer do you think it would be the revitalisation of the housing executive in terms of building social homes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to allow a situation to continue where the housing executive can build homes is not tenable. I think the more resource you can put into this, the better. I don't know what the technical detail is around the capacity of the housing executive to borrow, and I know that decision has yet to be made. But I think we also need to be careful. There's still a finite amount of money, so I think it's critical the housing executive is borrowing again. But I think it might take some time before that actually results in a significant amount of extra homes. And I think extra funding ultimately will still be required if we're going to build anywhere near the number of social homes they need. But I'm sort of not close enough to what the housing executive are planning to say any more on that.
Okay, well, to bring it then a little closer then is around the 153 billion welcome allocation financial transaction capital funding, and the increase of property value limit should be a significant boost to the co-ownership scheme. What impact do you think the intervention will have on the numbers of people able to benefit from co-ownership?
Well, the plan is that we will do 4,000 over the next 4 years. So we have seen an increase. So I couldn't provide these figures because we didn't have them until yesterday. But the completions we had from last year was 858, and that's actually up 14% from the year before. So historically, if the last few years, we were regularly doing about 1,000, just over 1,000. Then when the cost of living crisis hit and interest rates shot up, we saw a real drop. But we've seen a 20% increase in applications from last year. So we're quite hopeful that we will be able to do 1,000 each year. The pressures for first-time buyers haven't gone away. House prices here have continued to rise. Interest rates have come down a bit, but people's affordability in terms of buying their own home is still hugely stretched. And one of the reasons we increased the PVL, our property value limit, the limit to which we'll buy homes, is because of house price inflation, frankly. So we're relatively hopeful that we will deliver those 4,000 over the 4 years. Also worth saying, by the way, our other product, Co-Own 55s, we actually did 28 completions of that last year, so that was also good for a very, very young product that there's demand for it as well. If you're going to ask me the main constraint, it's availability of homes. So the customers that we approve that don't then go on to buy a home, they tell us the main issue is they can't find somewhere suitable. The average price we're paying is 150,000, but so people aren't necessarily buying up to the top because they can't afford it, but they are struggling. And it is new build. That problem is a no new build about to buy, almost literally first-time buyers. But it's also the turnover in the housing market, in the housing stock isn't there, and they're increasingly being forced to look at houses that need work done, that aren't in great condition. So I'm confident that the need is there and the demand is there, but it will be what happens to housing supply over those next 4 years, I think, will be the main issue. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're hopeful about is because as local development plans roll out, and as mixed tenure in a sense becomes a default approach, that those homes that will be made available exclusively through co-ownership should become a major supply for us. As the department's press statement said, the aspiration is to do about 30% of new build. Now, historically that wouldn't be very difficult because, you know, a couple of years before COVID it was over about 40%. This year it's 8%, last year as it is now it's 18%. 18%. And that's just literally because there's not a lot of new build out there, and because the new build that's being built is actually quite expensive. That's, you know, it's been driven by lots of things, but certainly that price increase in part's been driven by the huge construction cost inflation that everybody saw over that period, which has settled down, but it's like it hasn't fallen back to what it was. So I think it's pushing builders to make any sort of margin on it. They're having to build more expensive homes.
And in light of that availability issue, then there's a capital 2025-26 capital deal earmarked 100 million for social housing. What's your view on that allocation, and how much of a difference do you feel that will make?
Yeah, I mean, within the programme for government, the aspirations to do over 2,200, I think, each year. It doesn't seem that the capital currently available will deliver that. It would seem likely that it'll be like last year. It'll be done by monitoring rounds. That's not an ideal way to deliver a capital programme. I think it's also worth saying that if you look at the housing executive's figures, the housing executive are actually saying we need to deliver 4,000 new social homes a year. So, and I do understand that from a budgetary point of view, that's not a realistic ambition over the next couple of years, but I don't think we should hide away from the fact that that gap is going to continue until we get up to that level. Certainly my colleagues in other housing associations, you know, have the capacity and the will to build more homes. They just need the funding to come through.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to go to members now. So we have Marisa and Brian, then Kelly.
Well, pleasure of Mark and Charles. You're very welcome. Mark and Charles, just in relation to your roundtable event and the fact that you have mentioned here about planning and access to land, and I wonder just about the process here. And the reason I asked the question is that I was aware that where public land was available and that a housing association was interested in it, and yet and all, the sellers of the land, who were another arm's length body, were in such a rush that they weren't going to allow them the time to work out whether or not they would be able to get plan permission in order to build on it, which was very, very unfortunate. So there's a whole issue about that, we'll say, going on to the present time. So I'd like to ask you just that in relation to, we'll say, that identification of property and where does it one would hope to build at the likes of it, who starts that process for you, or do you do it yourselves as co-ownership, or is it the private developer?
The private developer does it. So we will buy homes off private developers, and we hope to buy more homes in future of housing associations. So in a sense, they will come to us at some stage in the planning process. So at that stage, they will have identified the site. And if it's a public sector site, they will have been through that process. I think what causes difficulty in public sector land is that once a public body identifies a piece of land as being surplus, they have to move quickly and get best consideration as quickly as possible. And I don't think that allows enough time for people to strategically think what's the best use of this site. And you'll also get sites of public sector land that are in high value areas, you know, so if you've a bit of public sector land that's in BT9, for example, in Malone Road, it's never going to be viable for a housing association to buy that because the market price will be too high, and all public bodies cannot sell below market price. I thought it was interesting the Minister said he's going to bring a paper to the Northern Ireland Executive to look at that, and I'd hope that those will be the things he'd be talking about, which is a more strategic approach to disposal of public sector land, and is it always necessary to get best value for that individual site if there's a wider public good can be got from that site to make it viable. So but to answer your question, we tend to be at the back end of that, so we get contacted usually when the planning process has started at that point.
And just finally, Chair, and that when it comes down to the pricing of the properties, what influence do you have on that?
It's market price. So we buy at market price, and we when people buy out, we sell at market price. It's really the only way it can work. So the process is somebody will apply to us, we will approve them up to a certain limit. So although we will buy properties now up to 210,000, about half of our customers we will not approve to that level because they can't afford it. So we give them that in a sense. They go and then find a property. It'll be a property that's on the open market, or more recently some that are exclusively available through ownership. So it'll be the pure market price. And then the person will essentially decide how much of that they can afford, and we'll work with them to buy the property off the seller.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, because it's crucial that we build homes in the areas where they're needed. And I think there is a lot more to value than just financial and market value. There's a huge element of social value, and I think it would be useful to include more and implement more of that consideration into the overall decision. Okay, thanks for that. Going now to Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark and Charles. And good to see you again. And I'm a big fan of co-ownership. I think it's an example of the right sort of intervention that helps make things happen for people who otherwise would find themselves just a bit short of being able to afford acquiring their own property. So I think it's an imaginative and practical solution for people. Thanks for your paper. You've identified various issues which you think are causing friction and difficulty in bringing more homes forward. I want to ask you about in skills and capability. You talk about significant skills gap and capacity issues within the construction sector, but you then finish that sentence, if you don't mind me asking, and in central and local government. So it's a bit cryptic. I don't know, would you like to comment on what you're referring to?
Yeah, that came up. The people at the round table were saying that their experience in, say, in the planning system is that sometimes, the statutory consultees, they have capacity issues. So one of the reasons sometimes statutory consultees take some time to actually respond to the consultation is because they don't actually have enough engineers or people like that to actually answer the question. I think there's also a concern that we also hear about the planning function within councils not having the capacity to progress things.
Right.
So I think the view was, I think right in Kelly saying it was a wider thing than just the construction sector. It was the whole system had a lack of capacity to actually progress things quickly.
Okay, no, and be well aware of that with planning applications which seem to last forever. In terms of access to land, and I know I've invited you out to meet the Build group in the Shankill and so on, and thank you for engaging with them, lobbying for derelict sites, both publicly and privately owned, to be developed. Do you at any stage lobby for sites to become available, or do you wait until a developer approaches you?
We would wait until a developer. It's not our area of expertise, frankly. There are people out there who know about development, who know about planning. Our expertise, to be frank, is about assessing people and buying and selling properties. So we would wait on either a private developer or usually a private developer to actually bring a site to us.
Could you assist in the lobbying, do you think? I'm aware in the Lombrick area, the Shankill, you made a significant difference there. I don't know what the percentage was. It was probably a third or so.
Like that, yeah.
More than that.
I was about that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it enabled, for years, people thought that level of private properties, new builds in the Shankill wouldn't sell, but you helped make it happen.
Yeah, I think what we are what we'd like to do more of, and one of the reasons I guess we're here today, is we want to make sure that everybody knows about it. And I think particularly with local development plans, we want to make sure developers understand we're here and that we create demand, and that we mean. If they build an area, we will bring customers if they build at a price level. I think it's for developers to determine the viability of a site. We don't have any real expertise in that. We can bring demand to that site, we can bring customers to it, but to know whether that site is viable for a developer is not something that is within our.
You're not reducing what they get. Is that for the cost of the property?
Yeah, we couldn't really have any opinion, to be honest, about how you would develop a site out to get, to make a return on it. So but I think our role is to say we're here. This is how it works, and if you build properties, we will bring demand, and as you say, in particular areas, we can bring quite a high level of demand because it's clear one of the things that our customers are crying out for is more access to more first-time buyer new build homes.
Yeah. Well, I want to come on to that. And you refer to yes, Minister Lyon's announcement. 150. I think you've left out the word million there in your paper. But anyway, it's 153 million pounds FTC funding. In terms of the property, the property value limit. What is the purpose of that? Is that so to make sure it's benefiting? The benefit is focused on lower income households and first time buyers.
Yes, it's to ensure that the property that people need the property, that they can't get it consumed by themselves. So if you imagine a property value limit wasn't there and somebody wanted to buy a £500,000 mansion, that wouldn't really be the right use of public money. So
there is a public subsidy that goes into it.
Yeah. So there's a better way of describing it, Charlie, but it essentially it ensures that public money only goes to those that cannot actually do this themselves. Yeah, I think is the best way of putting it. Yeah.
And last question, Chair. I appreciate you giving me time. Typically, do you know how long? I mean, your clients are buying half and renting half from you, and I know some would say, well, they'll maybe do a 20-year mortgage on half the house, and then another 20 years on the other half if they buy it all outright. But many will find during that time maybe money will come to them. Do you have any idea? Typically, how long does the total? If somebody buys a house eventually. Compared to normal mortgage, which might be 25 years, how long typically are mortgages lasting through yourselves?
Yeah, we wouldn't really have the detail of that, but 90% of people will buy us out in total, and they will, and about 50% will buy it within 10 years. So they're obviously
50% within 10 years.
Yeah,
right.
So they will obviously be capable of getting a bigger mortgage to take them out. What we so we don't know about tracking that, but we know our customers coming to us now are taking out longer term mortgages. I mean, much longer term mortgages, because frankly, that's the only way they can. When interest rates went up, that's the only way they could afford it. I think many of them would hope in future to be able to shorten the term of that mortgage. So the next time they refinance, they might be able to not take because the longer you stretch that mortgage out, the interest rate goes up quite considerably if you add another 10 years onto your mortgage term.
And over 550 people bought us out last year. Just so we're keen on sort of both ends of the system. Those that are coming to ownership and applying, and those also who we have helped on their way to full home ownership, which is really good to see.
Yeah, we regard that as ultimately that's our success, that somebody buys out the whole home and becomes a full homeowner. But for those people that don't, it's still a very affordable home that provides security, and they can stay there for as long as they want. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Kelly.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, gentlemen. It's good to see you again. I have a couple of technical questions for you. As you can expect, it's coming from me. The FTC, 153 million, fantastic. In order to come to that level of money that was requested, were the sites already identified, or is it still, you still need to find that land, or is there something in the pipeline that sort of identifies where most of that money may be used?
No, the projections were really done on the basis of what the need is that we're seeing coming through. So we looked at the previous 5 or 6 years, we saw what was coming, and therefore we estimated that over a 4-year period that we would probably need enough money to do 4,000 homes.
That's what you're looking at then.
Yes, so it is very much predicated on there being enough homes out there. Now, having said that, the vast majority of our customers do find a home, so I don't want to. I think from our perspective, it's also quite important not to be too doom and gloom about this, because I sometimes think young people don't believe home ownership is possible and don't, so we always like to encourage people to give us a ring, look at our website, find out. But no, we have no certainty that supply of homes will be. Now, most of our supply will always come from the resale market, so we're not overly dependent on the new build market. But yeah, it would certainly help a great deal if we were seeing more first-time buyer homes built.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I wanted to ask you about that is obviously housing associations will build, and there may be a certain percentage of the houses that are available for sale. Yep. Are there any de minimis or any other catches that tie up with the FTC money, or does that not come into it?
I don't think there's any constraints, is there? I'm aware of. No, it's
not seen as double funding. I suppose it's always been.
To come back to the previous question, if a house association sells us a house, we'll buy it at market value.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So then. So they're not. They will not use government grant to build that house, if you know what I mean. So it'll be.
Can I just ask as well, very quickly? I met with Woven. Now it's a while ago now, and they had talked about the potential and the opportunity. And to be honest, we are sitting on the cusp, if we had the land, of a building boom in Northern Ireland. But one of the issues that they have, as you talked about, was the planning delays. So they could purchase a piece of land, it goes through the planning process, and not a shovel hits the ground for 2 years. I'm just wondering if there's a new build, very cost effective for first time buyers, their mortgage, I take it, will not kick in until the house is built. So there's not an opportunity to use co-ownership to invest in something that will come.
Yes, basically. So the process will typically be, once the builder markets the home, our customers, if they've got an approval, will put down the deposit, and the mortgage will probably
will start just once they have bought the home, just in the same way as any other buyer would.
And so they can't use the co-ownership support deposit? No, that would just be the repayments for the house. Okay.
And we have a range of lenders who lend to our customers on the basis that they don't require a deposit, that they consider that our contribution is the deposit, which is very good for first-time buyers, solving that problem that people have in saving for a deposit.
Yeah, it is worth saying that that the deposit thing is as big an issue for people as being able to afford the mortgage. And if you're looking, and the difference between the cost of a mortgage, if you've got a 5% deposit and a 10% deposit, is quite significant. So if you think about it, £15,000 at 10% on a £50,000 home is quite a lot of money to save if you're in the private rented sector. So yeah, it's really brilliant. We have 3 lenders who will do a co-ownership mortgage without a deposit, and that makes a huge difference.
Which is amazing. Just in the fact that we have the private rented sector, the rents being so high, I should have declared an interest earlier. I do have a relative who I said, single person, who I said they thought they'd never be able to afford a house, and I sent them your direction, and they're now in the process of looking for a home because they've had the agreement. But that's the point, that single people think that they have no hope of buying a home, but actually this does help. So it's good to hear that banks are thinking along those lines, that co-ownership is the partner that secures the deal, really.
Yeah. Our advice to people is always, if you're thinking about it, come to us or phone a mortgage advisor, or because you might be surprised, particularly when you think of what people are actually paying in the private rented sector. It's always going to be cheaper to buy your own house, and it's always going to be a lot cheaper to buy through co-ownership.
My last question, Chair, is about, we're told all the time that the places that are identified in Northern Ireland as a need for housing is based on the housing executive applications, but people don't apply where there are no houses available. How do you find the reflection of where people are looking to get help from co-ownership? Does it reflect the housing executives' areas of identified need, or is it completely different? People will go wherever there's houses.
I think it's probably our customers will travel quite, so we get quite a lot of applications for people living in Belfast, but they will actually buy a house somewhere else. So I think people are relatively, they will, I think they have a broad idea where they want to live, and that's then tempered by whether they can afford to live there. And they will then, so even before they apply to us, a lot of people would have sort of a fair idea where they want to live, sort of idea what sort of house they're looking for. you know, and it'll be based around their job, based around family and things like that. So it's I don't think it's the same dynamic. Now, you know, the big population areas obviously are the same, the same, but it's I don't think there's much overlap in that sense. Yeah.
No, I'm really excited to see what this 153 million does. If only we could get a bit more land available and developers able to get the planning through on that. But thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. And just a final, hopefully a brief one from me, and I should just be clear, I sit on the Public Accounts Committee, and we have been looking at skills, and you mentioned that there are significant skills gaps in the construction sector. So what do you think needs to be done to ensure that the proper skills are in place? I mean, I think, as people have said, that there needs to be a proper skills strategy to actually make sure we have the capacity, and I think that's about supporting apprenticeships. I think it's about supporting further education colleges. You know, and you apparently have conversations with people that the construction sector is not attractive to parents often and to young people. I think people I talk to who work in construction would tell you that it's actually a really well paid job with lots of career prospects, you know. So I do think it is all, you know, we export a lot of our construction to Dublin and London and Manchester. I have a feeling that if we actually had a pipeline of work in Northern Ireland, and that a lot of people would actually prefer to work here, frankly, than having to spend 5 days a week in, you know, London. So my gut feeling is if we actually got building and we got things moving, that people would come back. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, listen, Charles and Mark, both. That's a very interesting session, and it is a very worthwhile scheme, and I think one that we should continue to, you know, flag up and make people aware of. I think probably a large part of the difficulty is people never becoming aware of it, and I think it'd be good to ensure that continues to be put the information put out there where people are looking at it. So appreciate your attendance today, and thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, do my best. Okay, members, any actions coming out of that members want to flag up? Or Brian?
That last question you asked, Chair, I think we should ask, I suppose, economy about their assessment of skills supply within the construction sector and what measures are being taken to increase it, the supply, you know, of skilled construction workers.
Yeah, members content with that?
Sure, the only thing I'm a bit concerned about is just from the construction industry perspective is because we've seen it with the who was it last week, SSE pulling out here of energy, because we don't have a very clear, now the housing supply strategy is one thing, but we don't have a very clear identification of what we're going to do moving forward, you know, with regards to retrofitting the energy standards that we're going to be looking at. So maybe we could add on to that letter to economy is, I know they have their energy strategy that's due, but as a result of their energy strategy, what are the skills specifically needed for Northern Ireland to meet its targets, and what are they doing to achieve the levels we need?
Yep. That's the skills more generally and the skills specifically around the energy stuff. Members content with both those? Go ahead, Brad.
On the planning, maybe I should have asked a bit more about that. Within the planning system, I mean, they raised there about capacity and the length of time taken for planning applications, which we're all aware of. So I suppose maybe if the two questions, if we wrote to the 11 councils and just asked what measurements do they have of the speed of processing of planning applications? Has there been any improvement? You know, are they tracking that? And so basically, is the speed of processing improving, or is it getting worse? And maybe ask for clarification about local development plans, which they reference here. I don't think all 11, maybe they have now, but I don't think all 11 have done, but maybe they have. Maybe did we ask that before?
Let me just check where we did. Yeah, so we have that. Yeah, we probably have that information.
Waiting a reply. Yeah. Well, could we get a summary of that? Do all 11 now have their LDPs?
We don't have a reply yet, so we're still waiting on the reply.
We wrote out before.
No, just to follow up on that, I know that the Minister for Infrastructure has put in, or is putting in place, I think, a support team to help with because it's the planning PAC can't process all of them, the Planning Appeals Commission, so I know that he's doing that. But my concern is just what Brian has said there. The Department for Communities is responsible for councils, but there's nobody holding their feet to the fire on some of this stuff. I know that DAERA, under our own Minister Andrew Muir, has put processes in place to speed up Northern Ireland Environment Agency statutory responses, but it's still, there's some planning applications are taking years. But we don't seem to have, and I was trying to get, isn't it Anthony you call him, from the department, to confirm what role the department actually has to say to councils, guys, you just need to get a move on with this stuff. Follow, absolutely, you legally follow the correct process, but what are we doing? Maybe we can ask the department what their role is to not manage, but to check, hold accountable the that's a good way to put it, of councils and how they're progressing things like planning, because that's actually a barrier to our house building here.
Yeah. If members are content with that, I think I would maybe suggest we add to Brian's suggestion is not only what the trends are, but what the councillors are doing to address those gaps and to ensure the system is fit for purpose into the future.
Does planning come under infrastructure partly? I'm not sure. Is it all under
finance and infrastructure?
Sometimes, that just division. But anyway, I think we'll ask the questions in our own right anyway.
Yeah, so can we get them directed to the right? Yeah. Members content with those actions? Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. So moving on then to the forward item 12, which is forward work programme, copy of which is at page 266. Do members have any comments or content to note the forward work programme? Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 13, any other business? Do members have any other business wish to raise? Sean?
Yeah, I just want to raise the attention of the committee, and I know we're going to be talking about the arts in a wee minute, but that will be a closed session. I'm going to send around a link to a blog that was written by Chief Executive of one of the leading community arts organisations, and it was, I'm just going, if it's okay, Chair, just to read a couple of lines of this from the 1st of April. So today marks the beginning of the new financial year. Not a single annually funded arts organisation has received a letter of offer from the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. No one even knows if they meet the threshold to receive funding, and we are now officially into a new working year with not a penny of funding in place, no contract signed, no safety net, no core support from our principal funder, just a hope that something might land in the inbox before insolvency kicks in or the protective redundancy notices get sent. Chair, I think that is a really sad indictment of where we are right now, that we have an entire sector of community arts who are living on a wing and a prayer, who are using up their reserves and all of their cash flow to get them through the next few months until the budget's confirmed and they get a letter of offer. I'm not placing blame on anyone, whether it's the department, the Arts Council. It's not about blame here. It's about a system that's absolutely broken. And we're allowing these organisations to run themselves into the ground, for staff to be put on protective notice year after year, not be able to get mortgages because of it, you name it. I just think that I wanted to highlight that, and I'll send the link to the blog round to members of the committee, because I do think it's important that we hear those sorts of voices and the reality of non-annual, multi-annual funding and all of that, and the toll it takes.
And are we writing to the department to ask them to urgently take that into?
I would really, really like just a letter to the Minister just to ask how long will this process take. So I know in the past when I've asked, it's about the agreeing of a budget. As soon as the budget's agreed, how quickly can those letters of offer and the money trickle to those organisations? Because right now it's just unsustainable. Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, because I think it was only Monday or Tuesday, groups under Neighbourhood Renewal received their 3-month letter. So even that cannot be given some interim funding. So maybe Arts Council is awaiting a letter of offer. I don't know. Are we going to write to Arts Council as well and ask them to clarify the situation?
Can do.
Yeah,
I think there's definitely a synergy, Brian, between what is going on in the community and voluntary sector and the arts sector, particularly when there's an overlap, when it's community and voluntary sector organisations delivering things within the arts sector. There is that overlap. So I do think it might be worth including the community and voluntary sector in that, but I just think it needs to be highlighted that there's these organisations who are having to dip into their own reserves for the next 3 months on a wing and a prayer.
Yeah, I'm also very conscious we've had a briefing on this deferred now twice. So
yeah.
Yes, Kelly.
Okay.
Sorry, just Kelly, can you check with Kirk that you're content?
We could have down, check your fact.
Yep.
During this meeting, news has come out that the Minister has launched £250,000 of a grant available to organisations to mark the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I was going to ask if we could get the criteria for this to find out about it, but it seems very difficult to hear that there are bodies, and I worked in the community and voluntary sector, and into some of these 3-month extension nonsense. To be honest, all it does is you get the news, Monday or Tuesday, and you tell all your staff you're on protective notice. To have an announcement of £250,000 going out for something to do with America at the time when we can't guarantee people will have work in 3 months' time is a bit difficult. But if we could ask for the criteria for the grant that's coming out, and also I think it's going to the Declaration of Independence falls about the same time as the FLA coming to Belfast. How's that going to link in together? But maybe we should raise disappointment with the Minister that now it could well be the timing of the budget, but it's these types of announcements when we have organisations that are on their knees.
Yeah. And no indication to committee at all of
that happening. I know it would have been nice to, as the committee, this is another communications issue, that again things are going to the media before they're going to the Assembly or to the committee.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't associate myself with that if we're expressing disappointment. I welcome that funding, and it's a hugely important anniversary in the United States of America, and we should be celebrating the connection from this part of the world to the American Declaration of Independence. I just want to say I wouldn't want to associate myself with expressing disappointment in that funding.
I could write the record, Chair. I didn't say disappointment in the funding. I said I was disappointed that the department yet again hadn't communicated with this committee. That's a very different thing. I was asking for the criteria about the funding, Brian. Please don't put words in my mouth. This is happening on a regular basis now. I have said that I'm disappointed that the department hasn't communicated with us about this. This is another thing that we've spoke to them about their communications, and yet again it's going to the media before it comes to us.
Yeah, so the proposal was around the process rather than the actual event itself and the criteria, and I think members are broadly content that we seek that criteria. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And members content that we express our disappointment that this wasn't brought to committee for consideration at some point in advance. Yep. Yeah. And your point's noted, Brian, but I think the committee have repeatedly raised these issues about things not being brought to committee, we are a scrutiny committee, and I think it's valid in that sense.
Right. Okay. Well, as I say, I'm not going to associate myself with expressing disappointment in this announcement. Not every announcement by ministers, is brought to committee. I'm relatively new to the Assembly, but that's my experience. Things are brought forward.
Your point is noted. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, members, thanks for that. Clerk, you're content with?
Yeah, we've got everything.
Okay. Thank you, members. Any other business? No. Therefore, members can go to agenda item 14, which is date, time and location of our next meeting, which will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 10th of April, here in room 29. And now the meeting is now adjourned, and we're going into closed session to consider the Arts Sector event report.